Greetings and welcome to my channel. This is Sorcerer Tal. You can also find me on Facebook in the Sorcerer's Guild. Today on Sorcerer's Shadow Volume 2, we are getting to the essay on Poppets. Now, as per usual, there will be a link to a Google Docs copy of this essay in the description portion of this post, along with a link to where you could purchase a copy of the Sorcerer's Shadow Volume 2, should you so choose. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk a bit about the essay and what a poppet is, and then I am going to demonstrate how to make a poppet, and then while I am going through that demonstration, we'll talk a little bit more about the ways to use a poppet. There are several ways to use a poppet, of course. The most, I guess you would say, cliche idea is that you get one and put pins and needles in it. This is where the idea of a voodoo doll actually comes from. Voodoo dolls, outside of the New Orleans practices, are not really very common in the voodoo type practices. They do exist, but it is not as common as it is in Welsh cunning, where they of course don't call it a voodoo doll, they call it a poppet. And these have been, these are very old tradition, have been going back a very long time, and not all of them are your traditional idea of the cloth doll with the hair stuffed in it. That's the type we're going to talk about. That's the type I'm going to demonstrate. But one of the easiest forms of a poppet, and this is from Welsh cunning as well, is to use an apple. The most simple is simply to write the person's name on it if you don't have any samples, but then you let the apple rot. Of course, if you have samples, you can put the hair, like cut a hole in the apple, put the hair, fingernail, whatever is inside of there, draw their face on it, and make a whole little, like, apple person of them if you have the skill, or you can just write their name, carve a face into it, especially if you have that hair, but then connect it to them. And then, well, an apple that's had all these things done to it and sat out in the sun isn't going to fare very well. And neither is the person who that apple is then connected to. So, that is one way to go about a very basic poppet if your intention is harm. But, as I say in the essay, that's not even really what poppets were originally designed specifically for. Yes, there's a lot of curse work that can be done with poppets, but there is also a lot of healing work. Well, really anything. This is a way to allow you to cast on someone as if they were there, or, more interestingly, in my opinion, you can create a poppet of yourself and cast on the poppet as if you were casting on yourself from the outside perspective. So this is a way to objectively cast a spell that you would cast on someone else on yourself. Okay, so like I said, we talk a little bit about what a poppet is, some of the uses, and then we're going to demonstrate how to make a poppet. Now, we're going to go with a very basic style of poppet, which is the traditional cloth sewed one. As we talked about in the last essay, the cloth you choose would be very important. This is just demonstration purposes, so honestly this is just a piece of fabric from the scrap, but the person you're casting on, you'd want to get their favorite shirt, a shirt they use a lot, some kind of fabric that's attached to them ideally. It doesn't have to be. If you can't get that, it's not an absolute vital part, but it is useful. If you're making a poppet of yourself, might have to sacrifice one of your favorite shirts, a little bit of it, something like that, another piece of fabric that has some significance to you, that you feel is connected to you, and that's what you would use. Okay, so after that, the first bit is very simple. I'm going to keep this very crude, because like I said, I don't know what everybody's skill levels are with this particular, well, not everyone knows how to sew, yeah? Okay, so you will have the piece like this. What you can do to make it easier is pin the fabric down at the bottom. I'm not going to bother, but you can pin the fabric down at the bottom and at the top to keep it all nice and straight. And you could even draw out, it's like a little gingerbread man shape on here, and that would give you something to follow. And you'll probably get a better poppet than the one that we're going to get from me doing it so crudely. But that's what you do. you take and you fold the fabric over, because you're going to want two of these silhouettes. Yeah, so you fold the fabric over, make sure that at least where you're cutting, it all stays even. And if you had some pins, it does help to put some pins in there. So, then you just cut out the little figure. Kind of like making paper dolls. I don't know if you made paper dolls as a child. So you just cut in here on this side for one arm, or the top of the arm, or the bottom. Actually, that's the bottom. And then you cut in again to make the arm. Make sure you hold this all good and tight. And you can have one of them on the fold, so you don't have to sew it. I went with the arm for that. And then you're just going to cut like a head shape, very basic. I have to sit this down. We're going to adjust the camera just a little so you can see what I'm doing. A little more. Okay. Make the round shape with the head. It's not going to be super round apparently. But like I said, this is not important that this gets artistic level quality. What's important is that you get a basic humanoid shape. If there's something specific about that person, if they have specifically long legs, or perhaps someone that is missing a limb, of course, you would take that into account when making their doll. And then you're going to come around this side, make that same lower cut. Make sure you don't slice into there. You want to leave, in this area here, you want to leave enough room that you're going to be able, because you're going to be folding this inside out when you're done. So, you're going to want to leave enough space on both sides that you can get all through that and you're not going to tear the fabric. And then you get your torso, so you come underneath the arm, cut down both sides like that. And I've gone a little narrow, so I'm actually going to expand it out a little bit before I cut the feet so I don't mess up. Just like that there. And then we'll come in and do the feet. Like this. Okay. Okay, I gotta put it down like this. Hold on a second. I don't have the highest skill level with this, so narrating and doing it at the same time are getting a little difficult. Give me just a moment. Okay. So that's not the best Poppet ever. Let's go ahead and put the camera back up. The rest of this I won't need that, so. Here is the fabric. Not the best little guy ever, kind of like a Sour Patch Kid. I'm going to straighten it up a little. It looks a little silly. This arm's a lot thicker than the other one. I don't really like the way the head's turned out so far, so we're going to go ahead and round that out some. So, hopefully that will give you some confidence in doing your own, because, you know, they don't need to be perfect, yeah? It's more about it just looking like a humanoid figure, and that is it. Okay, so the next actual crafty part after that then is the sewing with the needle. I mentioned before about a particular stitch that I was taught to think of as man stitch. That's not enough thread. There's a piece of thread in there, but it's not quite long enough. That is the stitch we are going to be using. It's very, very simple and basic. I'm sure there are other words for it that this stitch. It's not an uncommon stitch. So now the hard part, at least for me, getting that thread through the eyelet there. Hopefully this doesn't take so long I have to edit. Just a moment. This is quite difficult for me sometimes. There is a tool you can get that helps, but I don't have one with me. It's a little, I forget what they're called, but it's a little piece of wire that springs out and you can just push it through, put the thread through the other side and then pull it back and it just goes. Just a moment. You may have to bear with me. My editing software right now isn't fairly available, so you're gonna get a pretty raw cut. I'm in Canada. Don't have my full setup with me. Looked like the end was a little frayed, so we're gonna cut that off. Try this again. Ooh, wow, all right. So yeah, to me, that is one of the most difficult parts of sewing, as I was just saying. Some people have more skill with that than I do, but there are them little tools that you can get that make it much easier. And then what you do is you take the thread and pull it down. You want to get it pretty long, hopefully long enough to do the whole thing, but not too long. And then you cut the thread, and it will be doubled over. I'm not quite sure if you can see that on the camera, but yeah, see, there you go, how it's doubled over. So the needle winds up in the very center of the thread, and the ends are pulled even. Like so. And then you just tie a very basic knot on this end. Doesn't have to be anything special, just over under knot. And that's pretty much what man stitch is as well. Now, we take the poppet itself, and you're going to start on one side or the other of the head, because the head is actually where the largest opening is. And you just go through the fabric, and then take the needle, get it between the two threads, pull it tight. There's a little bit of a leftover here, but that's okay. You can either trim that off, you can trim that off afterwards if you get something like that, or, well, you're going to fold the doll inside out, so that's not going to be seen. And then you go in closest to the edge as you can with getting both sides through, and then you see this loop here. That loop there, you take and you put the needle through that. Oh, without that happening. Oh no, I did it. So that one was a little funky. Let's get real close and let you see that again. Good. Okay, so in, through, and then there's this loop here. Through the loop. And you do that, the closer together that you do that stitch with each insert, the tighter it is going to be. So you have to do you can do them farther away, or you can do them closer, But like I said, the closer you do them, the tighter the stitch is going to be and the better the doll is going to hold together. But the more thread is going to take and the more time. And you really want to avoid it bunching up. I've got some of that going on for some reason, but it's that same stitch over and over again all the way along the doll. And like I said, I'm going to keep doing this while we discuss some more things about poppets. Now, as I said, poppets are originally from Welsh cunning. They can be made off of many other ways besides this. In fact, this isn't the way that I necessarily always go with. This is a method, well, it's the most traditional method. I figure anyone that watched this video wanting to learn to make a poppet, this was probably the idea they had in their mind, was to make this sort of poppet. So that is the demonstration that we are doing. There's the apple one, like I mentioned. Oh, if you have any weirdnesses like this, as long as you trim them off symmetrically, you're fine. Probably going to wind up having to thread the needle again, so this might be a bit, but, oh, yeah, if I do that, I'm definitely going to have to thread the needle again. So, that's one of the things you want to watch for, is when you're sewing, you want to make sure that you don't accidentally catch on to the old thread as you're sewing, or you'll wind up with some madness like this. Which, really, you can just go ahead and break it, because each one of those knots creates a knot. So there's not like a chain reaction if you break one of these. That's one of the good things about the man stitch, is if one gets broken, yes, the other ones can come off easier, but it's not going to be a chain reaction. Because each time you pull the thread through, there is a knot. You don't have to use this method. There are people that just weave it through a bunch of times and then tie one, and weave it through and then weave it through a bunch of times. But this is how I like to do it. It does look like we're going to have to thread the needle again, so we'll be talking for a while. So what you do though is once you've sewn this all together, we're going to turn it inside out and then stuff it. The reason you turn it inside out is because that takes all these knots and stuff and puts them on the inside where they can't be seen, and the outside will just, well, look like a seam on your clothing or something like that. And, you know, skill level in the sewing itself, like I said, doesn't matter. So, the things that you will want to put inside the poppet. Obviously, if you can get your target's hair, fingernails, anything of that nature, stuff like we talked about last time. But, depending on the size of the poppet, you're probably not going to be able to get enough hair and fingernails to literally fill up the doll. You can use some things of filler, like cotton, that sort of thing. But also, if you have a specific intent with the doll, you would add those things as well. For example, if you were doing a doll for yourself and it was a glamour doll, and you were making a doll to give yourself glamour or to attract love, something of that nature, you could put rose petals inside of the doll. Alternatively, if you were doing a breakup spell or that sort of thing, you could put rose thorns in the doll. Not that I really approve of breakup spells most of the time. I suppose that there are extenuating circumstances, and I actually have had a client once that was getting ready to go through a breakup actually call and have me do a breakup spell. And not just to cause the breakup, because obviously they could do that themselves, but to ensure that it went smoothly. And what you do with that sort of thing is you make one doll of each person. And of course, where it was a client that had gotten a hold of me over the internet, I didn't have a lot to work with besides pictures. So I just had a picture of each person inside. But then what you do is you connect a string to the top of each poppet and connect the one string to both sides. And then you bring it up to the very middle, and you essentially do a cord cutting in the very center. And if you do it in the very center, that will help the breakup go smoothly. Neither person feels like they got the short end of the relationship if you do it that way. Of course, if you wanted to cause a bad breakup, you could do that the other way. The person with the shorter end is the way that was usually used to make the person that feels like they got the short end of the deal. However, that is metaphor, and there's a lot of debate back and forth. So when the thread gets so short that you can't cut knots anymore, you just go ahead and cut it like this. And then we get to do the hard part again. And we'll just keep going around sewing all the way around the doll till I'm ready to stuff it. Where this is a demonstration, I'm just going to be using some filler material that I have just to show you how it's done. But there are many different things that you can put inside the doll. It's very similar to a spell bottle in that way, and the type of ingredients that you would pick. You would pick ingredients that are related to the spell. I have heard of one case where someone was soaking... Oh my, just a moment. I had it and then I got excited and dropped it. Now I've got a loose needle on the floor. Now we do want to keep those things in mind. Working with needles, you can get stabbed occasionally. And that is actually more significant here than anywhere else. You do want to try to avoid bleeding on a poppet that you've made for somebody else. So some of the obvious answers to that then are thimble work, or really just using materials that are easier to use. So like if you're making a poppet, don't go with real thick material that you really have to push on and you're going to pop through, like leather or something like that. Because it's very hard to sew anything in leather without bleeding on it a few times. And you don't want to be bleeding on a poppet if it's for someone else, because once it's got your blood on it, well, it's going to affect you too. So you need to be very careful with that sort of thing in this type of practice. And if you are making a poppet for someone else and you cut yourself and bleed on it, well, you're going to have to start over with a new piece of fabric. There's no way out of that one. If you get blood on the fabric, that fabric's linked to you. So, use cloth, use things where you're not going to stab yourself so you don't have to do it 10 times before you get it right, and have sore little bits on your fingers for however long, depending how many times you stabbed yourself. So yeah, use easy materials. Try not to get tangles in the thread. Sometimes that's easier said than done, especially when there's already some other loose threads. Okay, so myself, I have mostly used poppets and voodoo dolls to cast on myself. I find that a very useful practice. We're going to be talking in the AWA series very soon about creating a mentor, which it's not going to be a doll. It will be a clay head. But this is another one where you're essentially... Well, this is some oddly loopy fabric. You guys are going to think I have no idea how to sew. I'm usually a lot better than this. Anyways. I got all kinds of, see? Got all kinds of these things hanging off of here. But that's okay. None of that matters. None of that actually matters. Because if there's small amounts of it, it's going to get tucked in. If there's big amounts, well, just go ahead and trim it off so it's not in your way and it doesn't keep happening. It's already been knotted inside. Like I said, anything like that that gets trimmed off is not going to cause a problem. So any problems like that, just trim them off. No big deal. Certainly don't want to get stressed out while you're making your poppet. Unless, of course, I suppose if you were making a puppet to cause someone stress, it might actually be great for you to get all stressed out and freaked out about how to make the puppet while you were making it, as long as you directed all that energy into it. So, actually, if you are someone who was needing to cast a curse specifically, and this whole idea of trying to sew a puppet fills you with a lot of stress and well, it's a good thing, my friend. Go ahead and use that as you make the puppet. Go ahead and give into it. Let yourself freak out and stress and do all that, but focus it into the doll. Focus it into the fabric. And then, once you do cast into the doll, it'll have all that in it. It'll have all that build up in there with it. Often, when you are doing this part, some people will actually have a statement of intent that they tie with each knot, adding a thread work into it. Like if you were, in the, the craft, they do that. I bind you from causing harm to yourself and harm from others each time as they tie the knot. That's basic thread work for binding. And you could do that exact same thing with each one of these knots. You would tie the knot and each time say the statement of intent, whatever it was. And then make the next stitch, say it again. Make the next stitch, say it again, etc. So, some of the other ways to make these dolls, and the method that I actually use most often anymore. I haven't made a Poppet like this in, well, it's been a few years. The type that I use, and you may have seen some examples of it on my channel, a couple have been around, I think I may have even talked about it once before, is with yarn. And what you do with those is you get the sample of the hair, all those things, and you take the hair and you just, like that, with the piece of hair until it kind of binds up into like a little thing. Like it'll go like this. It'll pull into itself and almost make like a little bit of yarn. And then you have to take yarn and wrap around that to make the body. And then if you have some more, you can put it out. You can put it out for the sides and make the arms. You can also use a stick or really just about anything to make some arms. And then you can either make some feet down at the bottom of it by putting more sticks and wrapping them into it as well. Or anyways, you can wrap them up with the yarn. And that method relies on tension. I might already have a video on that. If so, it's a few years old. If there's a lot of interest, like if someone asks in the comments to be shown how to make the yarn puppets, I would be happy to show those as well on a separate video, of course. But very soon, with the AWA, we are going to be making a mentor, which will be the next step in that. And the mentor isn't going to be, well, it is going to be a member of the AWA, but it is going to be the go-between between you and your highest self. And so this mentor that we'll be making, which will be a representation of yourself, that's what brings it up in relation to this Poppet video. This mentor that you will be making is of yourself. A little bit higher of you. It's like we're going to be making essentially an egregore to represent the path forward from where you are now to your fuller self in the center, where you have become exactly who you desire to be when you create the mentor. And that will be the next step on the AWA path. And then after that, we'll finally get back to the dream door. And we should be doing that one fairly soon. I actually just was speaking with the AWA in my dreams through the dream door about that particular thing, because I thought that perhaps we could make a voodoo doll, or excuse me, a Poppet, instead of the very simple clay head that they have been suggesting. And that's not going to work because, well, a poppet is attached to the body, the material. So you can very much make a poppet that will represent you and cast on yourself, and even use it to as an anchor point to try and go up, because I have done this before. But the AWA insisted that it would work much better without such material links that one would put into a poppet of themselves, because that is linked to who you are now, not who you are becoming. So we won't be doing that. Like I said, though, there's lots of very useful ways to cast a poppet on yourself. I have used them to enhance myself in several ways, as far as glamour work and even protection spells. Casting protection spells on yourself through a poppet is a very effective method. And you can even make a poppet of yourself and then place it into a protective circle to keep it there and make it as if you were always within that protection. And that is something that I have going on a constant basis, just because, well, it's best to be that way when you are active in these communities, and the occult community. I'm not saying everyone's throwing curse work all around. That's not very common these days. In the Yahoo chat rooms of the 90s, for some reason, that stuff was everywhere. It was constantly people doing these little spell battles with each other. So I very much got in the habit of keeping myself protected. It's not going on so much in Facebook, and it certainly doesn't happen in the guild. We have things to prevent that from happening. But it is always wise to have protection. So that is one technique with these poppets that I highly suggest, and I do have going myself several. You can make more than one poppet of yourself. You can make a poppet of yourself, seal it in a jar with war water as a protection spell. You could place them inside. Well, mine, I have a power bundle that I made in a more traditional method with a turtle shell. And then once the whole thing was created, one of the people that I put in it, because you create the turtle shell power bundle and then you have a way to put samples of whoever you want protected inside of the turtle shell. And so what I did was I created a poppet of myself and put it in there. Okay, so looks like this video is getting to be a bit longer than originally anticipated. So I'm going to go ahead and speed this up. Like I said, it is just a demonstration.